On June 22nd this year, just 2 days before the ceasefire, sitting US President Donald Trump had finally acknowledged the only lasting solution through a post on Truth Social. It says, it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? End quote. If you follow our show closely, you understand this is not the first time that we tap into the nation of Iran. And also last time we had the discussion regarding the term of regime change. Of course, within the political party, particularly within the GOP political party, there seemed to be a heavy division from calling regime change of Iran or stay out of Iran. Is it really Americans' job to fix the nation, politically speaking or economically speaking at this moment? And also given the fact today, foreign policy is rather crucial for President Trump. Again, not only we're looking at what's happening in Iran and also this ongoing economic suppression and human rights violation in this country. What do we know at this moment, and how do we know that what we call the political elites are able to change or transform the nation? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Professor Jamsheed Choksy. Professor Choksy is a distinguished professor of Iranian and Central Eurasian Studies in the Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies. He's the director of the Eurasia and Uralic National Resource Center at Indiana University. Well, Professor Choksy, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Nice to be back again. Thank you.
Well, Professor Choksy, again, it's so exciting to have you back on the show and hope your summer vacation is going great. Now, the reason why I reach out to you is because this amazing article that you recently published, it's called How the Islamic Republic of Iran Can Be Transformed. Now, again, as I mentioned in the intro, this is not the first time you and I we talk about the nation of Iran, but I want to get to the first question. Within the article that you came out with the phrase is called political elites. Now, today when we talk about the elites, when we look at Wall Street, we'll look at these economic elites. And when we look at environmental science and we'll look at this political elites or in this environmental science way. But when it comes to the nation of Iran, can you help us to define what is the definition of political elites and who are the people actually belong to the circle? How are they related to the current political instability of Iran? Your thoughts?
That's a very good question. I would say that the current political elites of Iran, let us say in distinction to when there were the Pahlavi Shahs. In the Pahlavi Shahs, there was the aristocracy there, and then there were the economic elites. Here, what has happened in the last 45 years in Iran is we've seen the rise of clergymen who have become not just politically powerful, but phenomenally wealthy. Many of them may not hold money directly in their own bank accounts, but they hold it through religious trusts that they administer. So in other words, there is economic clout that backs the political office that they may hold, whether it is the supreme leader, whether it is the head of the Guardian Council, whether it is a member of the Assembly of Representatives. So what we are seeing is a merger of religious authority, economic authority, and then in addition, some secular individuals who also are linked to the clergy. Many of these individuals are, of course, also intermarried, much like, let us say, the old European nobility used to be. However, in this case, they are also able to use that economic clout they have to be able to, shall we say, impose their will on the people, and not just in terms of, shall we say, financial factors, but being able to recruit individuals to physically, through intimidation, enforce their will. So I would say there's that aspect of the political elite in Iran. There's another political elite that has also emerged, the military elite. Particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and the leader, the commanders there. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, is estimated to control anywhere from 30 to 50% of the economy. And as many of your audience members will know, in the third world, the government already controls a very substantial part of the economy in terms of employment. Now, to that, when you start seeing contracts, large tenders, large construction projects, etc., all being funneled through civilian mechanisms that are not necessarily government bureaucracies, government ministries, but are actually behind it, the shadows, if you wish to, are these religious and military elites who have come to take over the country. So I would define it for Iran, particularly in that sense.
Professor Choksy, again, let's continue our conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning, President Donald Trump that posted on the Truth Social that current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again. I'm not going to say this is such a cliche, but when we look at the political, economic, and social establishment in the US, it's very much different from the nation of Iran. Again, we look at President Trump's campaign, even today, the political circle, this Make America Great Again, it's riding on the skyrocketing high journey. But for Iran, what does that mean, or how do we interpret President Trump's interpretation to make Iran great again? What does that mean? Does that mean political freedom? Does that mean to reduce the poverty? Does that mean social or economic equality? So how do we understand the words from his context, and why is it important for President Trump to come out to make such strong proclamation at this moment?
Now, I'm not going to say that I can read the mind of the U.S. leader. However, what I think he broadly means is that if you look at Iran now, we're looking at essentially most of the younger generation. So let us say if you are under 35, the opportunity for you to ever own a home, an apartment, is not within your reach. Your ability to come up with reasonable savings so that in your old age, you'll be able to look after yourself is not there. The government support networks that often we are used to, even in the developing world, are not present. So if I were to sort of, extrapolate from his words of what making Iran great again is, to ensure that those social safety nets are in place, that young people can feel that they can have families, that they have a future, that there are opportunities, that not only is there unemployment, but there's one of the problems we know we have in the third world is underemployment. And so those are some of the factors. So simmering beyond the nuclear issue, beyond the politics of the United States, of Israel, of Iran, beyond the geopolitics, when you look inside Iran, you see this tremendous strain that has developed and gotten worse of a government unable to manage its domestic issues. And even if sanctions were to be removed tomorrow, even if Iran's economy with the oil exports were to flow freely, Iran is so heavily dependent on oil and gas exports. It doesn't have a truly diversified economy. And so it is constrained. So if I were saying those words, it would be to make Iran great again in a domestic sense, but then also in a geopolitical sense. Iran used to be respected on the world stage. It was not a pariah. Iran played important roles in the Middle East, on the global stage. Iran was an early signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran was not a nation that went around threatening the existence of other nations. And let us take, for example, in my piece, I also point out that, the change of regime may impact countries like China and Russia. Now, China and Russia have entered into long-term agreements with Iran. But there is, in a sense, an economic danger for China in that. In other words, China is increasingly dependent on Iranian cheap oil. For very reasonably understood for China's economy to continue growing. That is necessary for the Chinese people. The problem is that all that oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. And essentially, at the drop of a hat, Iran threatens to close that down. That threat is less against the United States or Israel. I would see that as a direct threat to China and India that is dependent on that oil. And so when we talk about, Iran having fallen out of greatness, it's also in those senses that it even attacks its own friends, its own allies. It depends very greatly on China and Russia on the world stage. And yet it doesn't consider the impact of its words and potentially of its deeds.
Well, Professor Choksy, based on what you just described, that reminds me, in the political, not only in this political circle, but in a general way, there's a saying, it says, don't buy the hands that feeds you. Now, let's talk about what you just talked about, this relationship between Iran and China at this moment. Again, there's no denying that China today continued to reshape its economic agenda. Everyone is very concerned about this whole Chinese economic slowness. I mean, again, internally speaking, we've seen this Chinese economic is trying to pick up with the paces. But on the other hand, it is still worried or still anxious for people to see how far Chinese economy can grow at this moment. We just need to look at the consumer report. But meanwhile, like you said, Professor Choksy, Iran is growing closely to China. Again, I've been very much anticipating the involvement with the Chinese economy or for this Belt and Road Initiative. So the next question to you is, how do we evaluate the picture that if the Hormuz is less threatening to US but is more concerning to China, don't you think, again, we're going back to the saying, is don't buy the hands that feeds you? How does Iran play the game at this moment? Iran needs China, but you cannot afford to close down the Strait of Hormuz in order to lose the friend in economic sense. What is the complication in this situation, your thoughts?
It is possible that the Iranian elites are gambling that by making that threat, then Beijing will reach out to Washington and try to get Washington to be less militaristic towards Iran. The problem is, however, Washington is not going to close down the straits. If the straits get closed down, Washington is going to rush to try to reopen them for its benefit, but because it understands that the global order, despite all of Trump's tariffs and all, he does understand that the global order and the global economy is interlinked. So the United States will be the ones rushing to open it up. So yes, you're right. So this is part of the problem of when we talk about changing the regime in Iran. That is, the regime is sinking lower and lower against its own people, against its allies, against the individuals in the region. A lot of what it does ultimately has very negligible impact on the United States. And impact on Israel is only that it creates problems with missiles or with proxies. Much of what Iran does, in fact, affects the rest of the world. And let us talk a little bit about something we were talking about briefly at the beginning before the show. So right now, Iran is back to rearming the Houthis of Yemen. And the Houthis of Yemen have recommenced their attacks on maritime shipping going through the Gulf of Aden. Let us look at those container ships. Well, those ships are not staffed by people from the first world. The crew come from Asia and Africa. These are poor individuals who are trying to support multiple generations of families on arduous, long voyages. When those ships are attacked, so right now the latest attack killed 7 individuals. All those 7, I believe, were Filipino. The people taken hostage, I think there was 1 Russian. All the others came from Africa and Asia. These are poor individuals. No one's going to rescue them. The ships are owned by one company. The goods are owned by multiple companies. The crews are contracted from other companies. So essentially what Iran and Iran's proxies are doing is they're not impacting Israel. They're not impacting the other Arab nations. They're not impacting Europe. They're impacting their Asian and African neighbors. And so again, in terms of a regime that is falling, because we often talk about the geopolitics at this very high level, but there's a very basic impact on the common Iranian people, the common people of Southeast Asia, the common people of Asia generally, the common people of Africa. And so I think we also need to see that those people are not wanting to defy Iran. They're not wanting to defy the Houthis. They're just trying to earn a basic livelihood.
Well, again, Professor Choksy, indeed, you shared something that mainstream media that have not reported on, and regarding that the critical issues, like again, it's not just about the numbers that people who died, but it's actually about this relationship. It's about the tender relationship that throughout the political changes. Now, I want to end our conversation by asking you the last question. Going back to the article, your article is called How the Islamic Republic of Iran Can Be Transformed. This is something that you wrote at the beginning of the article, which is quite interesting, and I quote, "Political change likely will not be smooth internally, and politically stabilization and economic construction will require guidance, aid from outside, but a secular nation can emerge." Let's focus on the word require guidance and guidance and aid from the outside. Take China, for example. China has been well known for not interfering any domestic affairs outside China. So which means it's your issue, it's your problem that we love to support, but we're not going to offer any guidance suggestion. But on the opposite side of the table, US is different. It's not just about the role US play, it's about the anticipation and uncertainty from the international community. So again, Professor Choksy, from your perspective, last question. In order to see a smooth internally political stability, how much does outsider, I guess, can be involved at this moment? And also, we're talking about the effectiveness of the outsiders at this moment. Your final thoughts.
And that's a very good question. So let us start with the two extremes we talked about, the United States and China. The United States in the past, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Iraq, has gone in with an agenda of how political change should occur. On the other hand, China will provide economic aid, but have no political strings attached. Maybe there actually is a middle ground, a necessary middle ground. If you look at Iran, yes, Iran will immediately need economic aid because it needs to diversify its economy away from just oil and gas. So it's going to need a lot of technology and also individuals who can train local Iranians. That's one aspect. But on the other hand, it also has to get some degree of guidance of being able to, let us say, secularize its law code. Why can China not be involved in saying, okay, religionize your law codes? That would not be that. I would not regard that as interference. That is you provide, and you don't impose it. You provide models. You say, look, here's a way in which peaceful nuclear energy can be developed. Here's a way in which, at a very basic level, your political leaders can speak. Well, no one worries about China nuking the world. No one worries about America nuking the world. Right? The country, they're not calling They don't get up every other day and have their political leaders calling for the destruction of other nations. So at a basic level, there's also some, shall we say, guidance to say, look, here's how statecraft is practiced. Here's how you be a member of the international community. But also, here's how you secularize your law codes. Here's how you keep divisions between different government offices. Here's how you make sure that the military diversifies and is not involved in the domestic economy. There are ways, I think, in which a middle ground can be reached from these different approaches that can benefit not just Iran, but many other third world countries that are dealing with this. Now, like I said, it won't be smooth also because, as always, there will be scores that will be settled between individuals and groups. And again, outside influence of trying to counsel that vendettas breed more vendettas. If you think about the South African reconciliation tribunals, that was a productive path. So I think there are ways for outsiders to guide transformation, but not link it directly to economic aid. But of course, there's also going to be economic aid that is necessary.
Well, again, Professor Choksy, you said it, but today when we look at the complication and the complexity of the geopolitical change, it's not about one-on-one game. I mean, it's not a ping pong game at this moment. It's really about a soccer game. I mean, again, it requires and demands groups of effort to make the change and also make the voices louder and louder. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's such a great honor to speak to Professor Jamsheed Choksy. Again, Professor Choksy is a distinguished professor of Iranian and Central Eurasia Studies in Hamilton Lugar School of Global and International Studies. He's the director of the Inter-Asia and Uralic National Resources Center at Indiana University. And I strongly encourage everyone go online to check out this amazing article, which is entitled, How the Islamic Republic of Iran Can Be Transformed. Well, Professor Choksy, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show for our future discussion, not only just about the nation of Iran, and also about the complexity of the geopolitical change around the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, great pleasure. And I hope that your listeners and viewers are able to access the article. And I thank you for having me on.